Hey there, I'm Chris, and welcome to This Professional Life, a channel where I share my insights, strategies, and ideas around business development, as well as documenting interesting business stories that inspire my creativity. Hey everyone, welcome to our latest episode where we're taking a forward-thinking look at personal branding. As we move into 2025, the importance of, I would say, crafting and building and also maintaining a strong personal brand is probably more critical than ever. I know personal branding has, been a building concept over the last few years, especially with digital, but I'd say 2025 has made it even more crucial for people wanting to really do business out there. And so joining me today on this episode is Kelly Kennedy, founder and owner of Capital Business Development, a business development consulting and coaching firm here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Kelly is also a host and producer of a very successful podcast. I'm very envious of his podcast. It's called the Business Development Podcast. Go figure. Kelly, welcome to my podcast, to This Professional Life, and thank you for taking time to join me today.
Chris, it's a pleasure. Thank you for asking me to come on your show. I love Edmonton. I love Edmontonians. We've actually had the chance to meet at a chamber event once upon a time. My gosh, that was a long time ago now, man.
It was a few years ago where we met, and I think we were both getting coffee.
Yeah.
And I just, at networking events, I'm a talker, so I introduced myself and you asked me what I did, and I did business development. You're like, well, I run a business development podcast. But then as two BD people, we never followed up with each other until 3 years later.
You know what? That's my bad. I suck at in-person events. I'm not even gonna lie. I love going to them. I love the experience. But when it kind of comes down to the old school, let's get in touch with all these people, I'm not very good at it. So I'm gonna take the blame on that one.
No, it's equally. How's that? Yeah. I want to find out about your journey to capital business development first.
Sure.
And then we're going to talk about personal branding, because I know we were chatting in the pre-call and it's something that you seem to have a lot of passion about for 2025. And so we'll get into that, but I want to understand the journey, the person, how you got to where you're at, and then we'll go from there.
My story is a fun story, Chris. I was running as fast as I could away from sales when I fell flat on my face into business development, basically. I was born and raised in Edmonton, grew up actually in Spruce Grove, though, just outside of Edmonton. And so as a young man, wasn't really sure quite what I wanted to do, as many, many young men find themselves in that predicament. And, in high school, I worked on a car lot. I just worked at Grove Dodge at the time, and my job was to park cars. So from 17 all the way to about 19, I worked at Grove Dodge, and I parked cars. And I remember I was about to turn 18, Chris, and I went to the sales manager and I said, hey, I've been parking these cars for a couple of years now. I know them inside and out. I probably know them better than all the salespeople here. Can I sell them? He looked at me and laughed, and he said, Kelly, absolutely not. Mind you, this is a very different time. This is early 2000s, right? It was a different world. I'm sure now I wouldn't have got the laugh. I probably would have just gone, maybe go get some experience, or we'll put you through experience would have been the better, way to take that. However, at the time, that was it. He said, go get some sales experience and then come back and we'll talk. And so I found myself working at Visions, not 3 months later from that point. And kind of cut my teeth on electronic sales, found it really hard, found it, a little gritty. But the goal wasn't that. The goal was to get sales experience and come back. And so I did that, Chris. I went back, got the job at the car lot. This was, as you imagine, mid 2007, getting into 2008. And we all know what happened in 2008.
Yep.
It was probably the worst time on planet Earth to be selling anything, let alone cars.
Especially when I'm assuming the majority is purchased on financing.
Right.
So,
and I found myself in kind of a weird place, Chris, with that. A moral dilemma. A moral dilemma as in a bunch of people were coming into the car lot to buy their dream car. At the time, the Challenger had just came out. So everyone and their dog wanted a Challenger. But we were in a really hard time as a country, and as United States and Canada, frankly. And a bunch of people were coming in who, frankly, couldn't afford these cars. And they were getting approved for them. And I found myself in just a really weird place with it all, where on the one hand, the people that were coming probably shouldn't have been buying cars, and yet they were. And on the other hand, car sales at that time wasn't what it is today. It was a little bit greasy. I was being asked to do things, I'm not going to like talk about that, but there were things obviously being asked of anybody at that time that weren't really great. And I wasn't feeling good about myself. I wasn't making a whole lot of money. And so I ended up leaving that profession and ended up working for a parts sales company in the oil and gas industry not long after that. So my dreams to be an epic car salesman went out the window, but that was definitely for the best.
Yeah.
And ended up in parts sales, and I ended up doing that for a couple years with one company. Went and did it again with another company. Still wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and it was around 2010. I ended up getting laid off. Things weren't super great at that time for the oil and gas industry, and my sister just kind of pinned me down and said, "Kelly, what the hell are you doing with your life?" I was like, good point. So she had just went to college, and she's like, "You should go to college, Kelly." And I was like, "Well, I don't even know what I want to go for, but I'll tell you what, I don't want to do sales." So I'm going to go take business so that I can get out of sales and do like day-to-day operations or something. That seems like a much better option. And so I went to college for business admin. I did a 2-year diploma, fast track, got it through in a year, which was hell. I wouldn't recommend it. We got 1 week off at Christmas. Everything else was work.
Goodness.
So
yeah.
all day long I was in school. All night long I was serving and bartending to get through college. And so that was a crazy year. But not long after that, I ended up graduating, and I got a job with a company called Engrity Inspection Services in the city, which was an oil and gas inspection company. They provided welding inspectors and services to the oil and gas industry. And that was my kind of like first foray into that world. And at the time, I got hired on actually as administration. So I was handling payroll. I was kind of handling scheduling and getting people where they need to go. But my boss very quickly identified that I had a very strong sales background. And he's like, "Kelly, like, why are you doing this? Why don't you go and do, business development?" And I remember Chris sitting down at my computer and thinking like, what is that? I had to Google it. I'm like Googling on my computer, what is business development? Because I'll tell you what, I went through business school. No one even told me what it was. It never came up once in any of my classes. So it was kind of crazy, dude. And ended up getting into that, turned out to be really great at it, and found some passion in it. At first I sucked, and I sucked horribly because I was trying to sell and not try to build relationship. And it took me a long time to realize that what I actually needed to do was just shut up. I was talking way too much, and I just needed to focus on better getting to knowing people. But when I did that, Chris, my world changed, and my passion for business development went through the roof, because what I realized was it was just building great relationships with people who are friends to this day from, a career over, well over 10 years ago at this point for me now.
You remind me of, I had a similar story. My very first sales job was with Gateway Computers. I don't know if you remember them.
Very remember them, yeah.
Gateway decided to go into retail and sell. So they built their business off selling online, selling through catalogs and stuff. Yeah. And they decided to push hard into retail stores, and they came into Canada. And I remember sitting there in our sales training, and one of the sales trainers was like, "Chris, you know the most about electronics and computers, so we're going to have you come do the demonstration of how you're going to sell me a brand new computer." And here I am, overconfident, because I know everything about computers. I built my own computers back when I was in high school. So I get up, I'm listing the features, how fast this thing is. And the sales trainer was like, "I would never buy from you." And it was a humbling experience, because I really sucked at sales.
Yeah.
But it taught me a big lesson, to your point, is, you might be the product expert. Yeah. But there's a whole different angle and approach when it comes to sales, when it comes to business development. And that was the other thing I learned too, was sales and business development are different as well. But you're right. Like customers used to come in and like you could just see you're rattling off everything, and you learn to just shut up and listen. Yeah. And then that's where you start building that relationship.
Yeah, man. I always say, like, I may be an expert today, but I got here on, a mountain of failure. Right? Like the reason, it's so funny because it's like now I teach a business development process, a really effective one. But
Yeah.
people ask, like, well, why do you use this process, or how did you come to this process? And it's like, because I failed at every single one of these things and learned that I had to do it. I don't do processes because I love them. I
Yeah.
do them because they're the thing that make me successful.
I used to do BD shot in the dark. I will be very upfront, right? Like 15 years ago, it was just like it's a scattershot approach, right?
Yeah.
Volume, the more I do, the more I get there. But you're right. Like I've obviously since as well myself in my professional career, processes and systems and organization, blueprints, step by step, it saved my life and really put a lot more purpose behind the approach. One thing as a car guy to maybe another car guy, what was the coolest car you got to park at this dealership?
To park a Viper. I got to actually dealer transfer a Viper once. And that was, as a 17-year-old kid, that was pretty epic.
Oh my God. I remember driving in Edmonton one time, and I think it was 1997. I'm in my like crappy little Honda Accord and going into downtown, that electric blue with the white stripes, Viper GTS pulls up beside me.
Boy. Yeah.
And I was just like, I want that car.
Yeah. Yeah, they're so beautiful. I don't even know if they make them anymore, but man, yeah, absolutely.
Vipers, they don't. They tried for a while with this SRT thing, and it just hasn't picked up. But I digress on that. But it's interesting too, because I will say stories and sharing stories are also a part of business development and building relationships and connecting with folks. But I want to turn to personal branding, especially coming into 2025. And I say this because, and we're going to hopefully cover some of this, especially with AI coming out.
Yeah.
And you have the early adopters, and I hate to do it, but you brought up that the car sales, how it used to be slimy. I almost feel you have that segment of folks who take advantage of, they're the first movers.
Sure.
And it just makes it so I feel like AI has turned into this slimy thing where, people are using it wrong. People are just using it to pump out stuff for the sake of pumping stuff out. So I personally feel personal branding is what's going to set people apart. And that's really where people need to focus on. And you may think different, but we'll talk about that today. So I think let's first start out. Why did you choose personal branding as a topic we should focus on in today's episode?
It's so funny, Chris, because when I actually started the podcast, that was my first foray into personal branding. Like, sure, Kelly Kennedy, the business developer, had existed for a very long time. But what I realized was it was back in 2022 that if you really want to be an expert in something, truly, you have to be willing to share that information with people, right? And business development, for whatever reason, I have no idea why. I haven't talked with enough people long term to be able to have that like conversation understanding. But we've been really protective. And I don't even really understand why. But as business developers, as an industry of people, we have not done a very great job of sharing that information with the rest of the industry. We kind of hold those cards tight, right? And I realized that in 2022, that for 2023, I wanted to do something. I wanted to do something where I could share this knowledge with the world. At the time, I didn't actually realize what I was doing was going to be building a personal brand. I wasn't that forward thinking yet. Like, I hadn't experienced what that would become. At the time, I just thought, I'm going to share this information with the world. Why not? It'll build credibility. I'll be able to share this knowledge, and who knows, maybe we'll get more business out of it, right? Like, that was what was going through my head at the time. I just knew that in 2023, I wanted to take that leap, but it was something that I was pretty scared about as well, right? I had no experience in podcasting, as many of us don't when we first get into it. I'm just a dumb business developer guy, right? Like, I don't know the first thing about producing audio or doing a show or what any of that can look like. So that was just, a huge leap for me. And we can talk a little bit about that launch, because I don't know about you, dude, but I made the decision that I was going to do a podcast in December of 2022. I've had the equipment about 2 weeks later, and I kid you not, I put it in the corner of my bedroom. All of it. My Rodecaster, my mic, my stand, everything. And it just sat there because I was in a bit of like an analysis paralysis with regards to like my fear of putting myself out there. Because I think the first step in anybody's personal branding journey really is You have to be willing to put yourself out there. And so the first fight you have is with yourself.
Right? Yep. Yeah.
Right. And so I kid you not, it sat in the corner for about a month and a half. And my fiance, we're in bed one night. She looks at me and she goes, Kelly, either sell that stuff or go and record a damn podcast, but get it out of our room. That night, Chris, I went down, I set it all up, and I recorded the intro episode to the Business Development Podcast, and the rest is history. But man, I really feel for people right now. I really do. I feel for people in 2025 who are just waking up to the realization that the world has changed around them. I think me and you were a little bit blessed because we got a little bit ahead of it, right? Like I would say things really changed in COVID, and by 2023, people were really thinking like, if you were a podcaster hopping into the business podcast space at that time, you were a really early adopter. I would like to say we kind of got in at the right time.
Yeah.
And now we have a lot of people recognizing that 2024, the year of personal branding, I like to call it, personal branding exploded. And now you're kind of being forced to launch your personal brand as opposed to it being a choice. And so I do have a lot of feels for people right now who are taking that leap. And actually, even tonight's show on the podcast is about the power of personal branding and hopefully putting out some information that I can share here to like help people take that leap, because it's not as hard as you think, but you really do have to fight some internal battles with yourself. You're your biggest hurdle.
Right. So how do people get over that? Like, what are some, you had obviously a really supportive partner
Sure.
who told you to move it or lose it, literally. So, that's one way. But like, how do you get over that personal hurdle? Because, I help a lot of lawyers too, right? Get over that when it comes to business development. And, when I was at Denton's, out of the 200 lawyers I pitched doing podcasts with, only one took me up on that offer. And her practice has grown exponentially.
Totally.
Still, with that as an example of the success for her, lawyers still hesitate. And they're very smart, professionals.
Yeah.
But it's themselves. They are their own worst enemy when it comes to this.
Yeah. We're so afraid of putting our foot in our mouths, right? We're so afraid of saying the wrong thing and having our entire career come down on our heads. I get it. I totally get it. But here's the thing. If you aren't willing to put yourself out there as an expert in your field, you will never be an expert in your field. You have to bridge that gap. You have to take that risk. And I get it. It's a scary risk. But, between me and you, Chris, I've been doing this now for 2 years. We've released 205 episodes as of tomorrow.
Amazing.
And I've never had one person reach out and be like, Kelly, that was crap. Why did you put that out in the world? Not one person, right? I think we're really, really afraid of something that is actually incredibly unlikely. But the media has made it seem like, don't say the wrong thing. Don't do the wrong thing. Don't give bad advice or advice at all because it might be bad or someone might. Like, that isn't the world we live in. Most people are good and most people want that information. Not just want that information, need that information. So if you're an expert, you have an obligation to share that information with the world.
What's interesting is there was, I think it was mid last year, I was feeling a little burnt out and I just stopped producing content for a few months. What was interesting was I had a few people reach out to me on LinkedIn and they're like, hey, are you still doing what you're doing? I've been watching your stuff and I've noticed that you haven't uploaded recently. Mm-hmm. And it really hit me. I was like, oh, wait, there's an audience out there. And they actually value the content. And so it kind of kicked me back in gear, which is why for 2025, I've put priority on really getting this content put together so I have it ready for, the first half of the year to get it released out. But you're right. Like, I like the word obligation. I think we're in that world here where it's like, Nothing is sheltered. Nothing is behind barriers anymore.
Yeah.
You're right. There's that old school thinking, and I still run into that with clients. Like, oh, you can't tell people about this. I'm like, it's not rocket science here.
Yeah.
But it does come down to how you implement and execute it.
Yes.
So I can share this all day long.
Yeah.
But if they don't pick up on it and actually implement it, then, that's my differentiating factor.
You know what? You mentioned your burnout, and I want to talk about that with you because it's serious. Like content creation, burnout is a real thing, dude. I have hit the wall so many times. I haven't stopped, but I've hit the wall so many times where, dude, I sat down and I was writing my show plan. And I was like, oh my God, like, I don't want to do this today. I don't know if I have the energy of Kelly to be able to do this show. That is the double-edged sword of this new content, personal branding driven world, is that it's basically an over and above, right? Yeah. People aren't really thinking about that. You still have your job. You still have the thing that you've been doing this entire time. But now, in order to take that next step in the business world, in the future that we're going into, you have to be willing to create content, put yourself out there in whatever form that may be. And the downside to this is, and I'm not going to say it's all pluses and rainbows, because it's not. The downside to this is it just got tacked onto our plate, onto an already busy plate for most of us, right? Like most of us content creators, we're not raking in the dough, rolling in it. Like this isn't our full-time job. This is the thing that we do because we're passionate about it. Yeah. But even if it makes money, it's a small portion of the money we need to make to live our lives. So I think people aren't really realizing that. They're seeing shows like this. It's well produced. They're great conversations, but like people aren't remembering that these don't make, hundreds of thousands of dollars for a long time.
Yeah. Right? Well, and I always remind myself, I don't know if you follow Casey Neistat on YouTube, but
No, I don't.
So he's OG YouTube. Like,
okay,
he had a show on HBO with his brother, Van Neistat, and then he went on YouTube. He was actually the one who basically created the vlog.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you look him up, Casey Neistat, he's got tens of millions of followers now. But a few years ago, he stopped doing daily vlogs. And then you started seeing this cascade of other content creators who their full-time job is to create and monetize YouTube content. They started falling off and stopped doing daily. And it's only now that they're starting to make videos again, and they're actually talking about this burnout. So I always tell clients, and I also tell myself this, is they do that full time and they got burnt out and they needed a break. Yeah. So you know what? It's okay if I am, because you're right. I'm not making millions off these content. It's all free. But it's, for me, it's a business development tool for myself to get out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I will say that if you haven't monetized, you should definitely look at it. And obviously the reason being is, me and you both know, podcasts, they're not free to produce, especially not at this quality, right? We are not in our basement just like putting out a show right after we record it. No, there's editing. There's lots of editing time. There's production time. You're probably creating a video from this and clips and everything else. Plus you're managing your social media and sharing it there, right? Like, the amount of time that goes into a show like this is probably 4 to 5 hours for every hour recorded of production time to recording time, right? So people don't kind of realize the amount of effort and time and money that goes into this. And so I always say now, Chris, to podcasters, when people reach out to me, I say, start your show with the idea that you will monetize and make every decision along the way with that in mind, because the day will come when you have to monetize your show simply to compete in your space, right? Because all the biggest business shows, they got hundreds of thousands of dollars coming in to support their advertising campaigns, to get the best guests, to do all that. And none of us are in this to be mediocre. All of us want to do a great job and eventually have maybe one of the biggest shows in our space. But in order to do that, it takes support. It takes money. And so I always say, if you're starting a show of any type, YouTube, podcast, anything like that, always do it with the idea that even if it's your passion project, at some point you got to figure out how to, at least bare minimum, cover your costs and then hopefully be able to make enough to advertise as well.
Yeah. So let's talk about, I guess, the core aspects or the things that professionals who want to focus on their personal brand for 2025, what are some of the key things that they need to focus on to start building out this personal brand?
Yeah, what I see, especially when I'm coaching people, what I'm seeing a lot of is that they're sharing their corporate posts, right? So they're sharing their corporate posts and they're like, well, I'm doing it because I'm sharing the corporate posts. And it's like, no, that while that is brand building, it is not building your personal brand. And so we kind of have to like level set people to understand that your personal brand has to be human, has to be authentic, has to be you, right? I always say your personal brand actually has next to nothing to do with the company you work for, right? And people struggle with that because for the longest time with social media, especially LinkedIn, right? We're talking LinkedIn. That's the world of the personal brand at this point. I guess Instagram too, depending on your companies, but most people are building their brands on LinkedIn. And with LinkedIn, for the longest time, pre-COVID, we didn't know how to use it, right? Like that's the truth. I would say like nobody actually understood how to use LinkedIn effectively until COVID, until we were kind of forced to connect using it, right? Yeah. So the way that we've always used LinkedIn in the past has been to promote the businesses we work for, right? So if they would share a post, we would share it on our page, talk about it, talk about the events. We'd have photos of us at trade shows or at our latest lunch meeting or whatever it is. And actually, the lunch meeting one is still good. It still falls under the personal branding space, but we didn't realize that was what it was then. Right? So I would say COVID hit and we all got forced to work from home. And we all started realizing that if we needed people to know us, we needed to connect with them digitally, right? And so I would say, let's call it 2021, 2022 was really the big launch of this next phase of personal branding. And it's hard because people haven't quite realized yet that it's about reach. It's about impressions. It's about getting as many eyes on you as you possibly can. And you personally, right? Because you need to build who you are, what you stand for, what do you care about, and what do you do? And what are you an expert in, right? And if you can do all of these things effectively, it's no longer about who you know. You get this like incredible influx of people who now know you, even though you don't know them. So a personal brand is really not about who you know. It's about building a platform that turns into who knows you. And I would say the future is about who knows you, not necessarily who you know. While they're still very important, who knows you is going to win 2025 and beyond. And so we have to focus on building a personal brand. And really what it kind of comes down to is don't be afraid to share things about who you are. I don't know if you noticed, me and you both use LinkedIn pretty effectively. We use it a lot. I'm on it every day. If I post something about capital, right? Like if I post, oh, we're taking new clients or look at this cool thing we did, nobody gives a shit. Nobody gives a shit what we're doing with our businesses. It's just the truth. We don't care. But if I post a picture of me with my son working on a computer in my living room, and I talk about the challenges of running a business and being a great father and being a great partner, dude, I get like 20,000 impressions on that one post in like 10 hours. Yeah. Right? So I go from nothing. And so what it is it's really about putting out content that people can relate to and that they care about. That's really, if I look at the essence of what building a personal brand is about, it's about relating in a way that other people can connect with and be like, yeah, me too. If you can do that, you are going to extremely effectively build your personal brand. And the cool thing about building your personal brand, and the reason I think it's so important as we move forward, is that your personal brand raises everything and everyone around you. So, for instance, take Elon Musk, right? Let's just use Elon Musk because he's a rock star. And that dude could start any company on planet Earth. It wouldn't care, like nobody would care what it is, right? But because Elon Musk started it, it would succeed. And it's completely based on the fact that he has probably the best personal brand on planet Earth. So the personal brand actually can raise or make more successful everything in your area. And so I always say now when I'm doing business development, when I'm coaching it, you have to build your personal brand, because if you build your personal brand, no matter what company you work for from this point forward, you are going to elevate that brand everywhere you go. And instead of 5 people caring what their posts say, thousands of people will care what their posts say. And so businesses should be promoting this. Businesses should be helping their employees build their personal brands, because it's a win-win. It helps the employee, helps the business.
Yeah. And it's still interesting to see, though, how many companies out there will not let their professionals and their leaders to post freely on social. And I get the risk. I get liability, brand liability. However, I still struggle when I see so much opportunity for some of these big companies to empower their professionals to go out and be authentic. They can't. They're not allowed to. I have a financial planner friend who I'm like, you have so much opportunity here, especially in a time of financial uncertainty, to be that leader. The big brand won't let him.
Yeah. Well, who I'm seeing succeed, I have a financial planner friend as well, who's really taken the leap in this past year. And I'm just watching him blow up on LinkedIn. Mind you, it's his company, right? And I think that's what it is. It's like, the people who are going to succeed with this are the people who are able to pivot the quickest. And so you have all these companies with outdated, I would call them pre-COVID policies, right? Like social media, they have social media policies from 2016, right?
Yep.
But 2025 is a completely different time and place than 2016 was. And you're absolutely right. We need to allow employees we need to relinquish the reins on them. We need to let them be themselves, because that is the superpower as we head forward.
And it's weird to me, because that same financial planner is expected to impart his advice and knowledge, at the kitchen table with his clients, right? So you can't control what he says there. And I get you're out in the public on social media, but I struggle with that. I struggle when big companies put that overarching, stranglehold on their employees.
Like, if you're a really, really big company with big pockets, like I've worked with some of the biggest companies in Canada, and I know they're very careful legally with what they commit to and what they sign, because if someone goes after them, they have $2 billion in the bank. That's a completely different type of company, right? But I think for most companies, like most of the companies, let's call it 95 to 99% of companies within Canada, you would benefit from letting your employees be more authentic. And here's the thing that you're really afraid of, it is so unlikely to happen. It is so unlikely that they're going to say something so bad that it's going to hurt your company, that it's worth the risk, in my opinion.
And frankly, if they're going to say it, they're going to say it anyways.
Yeah.
Right. Again, you don't hold their phone.
Correct.
So if they are going to go down that path, they're going to go down it anyways.
Yeah, and I would argue that anybody speaking, in a public way such as that, they are speaking on their own behalf. They're obviously not representing the exact beliefs of the companies they work for with their personal opinions, right? Yeah. So I think it's important for companies to remember that most people understand that if somebody says something, it's them saying it, not necessarily the views and opinions of the companies they work for.
So you brought up, when you're posting pictures with you and your son working at the computer and you get a lot more hits. Do you think there is a need to balance authenticity and your professional image, or is that the same? And, you can't pose with your professional, you are who you are.
That's right. Yeah. I would say there is no separating Kelly Kennedy from business development at this point.
Yeah.
If I'm posting my opinion, I'm posting my opinion as an expert business developer. Right.
Yeah.
So I do feel like it's almost impossible at some point to separate your profession from your company. And here's the thing, dude, I've interviewed well over 100 people, 100 professionals, people that have made immense wealth. And I'll tell you what, like, there is no such thing as work-life balance, right? Sometimes there's work, sometimes there's life, but you do your best to make sure that the thing that needs to be getting the attention is getting the attention. But like, dude, I don't think I've met anybody yet who would say that they've achieved perfect work-life balance without a lot of trouble to get there. And even if they did get there, they got there after like 10 years of struggle, dude.
Yeah.
Like it was,
Yeah.
even then, work-life balance it's an opinion. It's a feeling. Like you can't quantitate it.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah. No one can.
Exactly, right? Like, do you feel balanced today? Sure. Today feels like a good balance. Tomorrow might be something completely different. And that's okay. That's okay. I think it's important for people to remember that, like, you're human. We all have, families. We all have lives outside of work, but we're an accumulation of all of it, right? You can't separate Kelly Kennedy from business development no more than you can separate your friend from financial planning.
Exactly. Are there any tools, people can leverage when it comes to building their personal brand for 2025? Anything that you've looked at that's worked well?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, okay, so 2025, things are shifting again. And let's talk about it because you chatted about AI in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
And how AI is being overused. Let's talk about this. If you are just using AI to create your posts and putting it out there, as a lot of businesses are, you're doing it completely wrong. And the reason you're doing it wrong is everybody and their dog who is lazy is doing this, thinking, oh, well, now my company has a social media platform. We'll just put content out there. The thing is, there's now a sea of AI created content, and you're no longer standing out by just putting AI content out there. I think like companies need to remember this. You aren't standing out by being the same as everybody else dumping AI content everywhere. I would say in 2025, if companies and people want to stand out, go back to hand typing your posts like we used to on Facebook back in the day. Go back to taking authentic pictures of something you did with your family over the weekend or something amazing your company's building and talk about it. Find ways to connect. And here's the thing. We've gone so far in the wrong direction with AI, Chris, that the way to connect as we move forward is to remove as much AI and as much robot, take the robot out of it, put humanity back into it. Dude, I think 2025 is going to be a massive year for the human-centric approach. Anything you can do to connect more as a human, you're going to be successful with. And so on that vein, I've like jumped into video this year. I didn't want to do video. I didn't want to do it. Like, I've been putting it off, dude. I have an audio only podcast. We share clips, but the show is audio only. But I am doing like video series now, doing education and inspiring, and I'm putting some of that stuff on YouTube, but primarily on LinkedIn. But the reason that I'm doing that is that there's nothing more authentic than this. There's nothing more authentic than talking to you as a human. And the cool thing about doing video is people can watch it 24/7 whenever. So it's working even when you're sleeping. It's literally an investment in yourself and your brand that works all the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a video on my YouTube page that's kind of blowing up right now. It's driving a lot of subscribers for me. But for the first 6 months, I was sitting at maybe 80, 90 views. I think now it's over 20,000.
Wow.
But it just started happening in Q4 of last year. So it's evergreen stuff that, you can, as you said, keep working on your own thing, and it can, help you down the road. You never know.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked a little bit about like what I've seen with regards to trends in personal branding. Do you have any like opinions on that, or have you seen maybe some different things that I've missed?
No, I think this year is the year we're going to start seeing people actually pull the trigger and do it. I think a lot of hesitation last year. I think people started going, you know what, might not be a bad idea. But I think as, whether it's we've got an upcoming recession where things are slowing down, or, the ways of just knocking on doors and trying to get sales is kind of tapped out. People are going to start looking at, I think this year is the year people are going to pull the trigger. We're going to see a lot more. I think LinkedIn themselves have, they've talked about revamping their algorithm, trying to get more relevant. You're starting to see like almost like YouTube Shorts. You got LinkedIn Shorts
Yeah.
is now quite prevalent, and I think professionals don't spend as much time on LinkedIn as, the everyday consumer does on some of the other platforms. Nonetheless, the content you make on LinkedIn, I think will be, it's highly relevant to your target. And I think that's where LinkedIn probably has an edge over
Yeah.
the other platforms, right? I'm not doing dog videos unless the dog video has a business story behind it.
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
cat videos is another one, but I think, I think for me, that's what I expect to see. I expect to see a lot more professionals leverage LinkedIn,
Yeah.
just with the environment of what is going to happen with business coming into 2025.
Yeah. And I think like while it is a long journey, like while I'm not quitting my podcast anytime soon, and likely neither are you, it doesn't take as long as people think to start to really build that brand, right? Like, yes, it's a long-term endeavor. Once you start this journey, you're going to be on it probably for your career. It's probably not going to stop. Like, I think there's never going to be a time where not continually building your personal brand isn't
Correct.
great for you, right?
Yeah.
So it is a journey you're going to have to start. And when you start it, you're probably going to be in it, for the long haul. But it does not take as long as you think to start to establish yourself as a thought leader in your field. And I think a lot of people think like, oh, there's already lots of people talking about finance. There's lots of people talking about sales, or there's lots of people talking about business development, whatever, right? But understand, there are going to be people who want to hear it from you. People get, wrapped up. There's a lot of business shows. Sure, there's a ton of business podcasts. That doesn't mean that this podcast or my podcast aren't going to be equally successful, because there's always somebody who prefers to learn it from me or Chris, right? Like there's going to be people who prefer one of us over the other. And so those are our people. Those are, in my case, my rock stars, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's important for people to remember that, like, just because there's a lot of people in your niche doesn't mean that you won't be epically successful in whatever you start.
Well, the other thing too is people forget that these platforms have over 1 billion users on them.
Yeah.
Like people forget that on YouTube, you get 1,000 views for a very, unknown person, but your stuff is out there in front of billions to potentially watch. And if you can just capture 0.00001% of that user base who really identifies with your content, it's golden. And I think that's the power. It's the scalability in your audience, right? The getting out there, I think is where these platforms come in. And you're right. Like if you're not doing it, then, you're missing out.
I would also say that a lot of content creators, they're getting in with no idea where they're going, with no goals, right? They're just like, oh, I'm going to start a YouTube channel, right? What does that mean? I would say to anybody who is going to commit to any type of content, whether it be podcasts, videos, YouTube, education of any type, give yourself enough time to win, okay? Almost every content creator, because the statistic is horrid, almost every content creator is quitting way, way too soon. And so I always say to anybody who comes to me for, I want to start a podcast or I want to start a channel of some type, what is your best advice? My best advice is this: commit to 100 episodes of anything, a video, a YouTube channel, a podcast. Give yourself enough runway to succeed, because it's designed that way to make you leave. The people who succeed are the people who give it the long-term run. So it's designed in a way to make it easy to enter, but hard to win, right?
Yeah.
The people who win stick with it.
So that's actually a good segue into what I wanted to kind of wrap up here on is how do we measure success when it comes to building your personal brand? Are there specific metrics people should put together or what should they be tracking?
I think that they should be, it's hard, right, Chris? Because me and you both know as a podcast, our metrics change all the time. There are times when our shows are super popular, and there are times where it's like, my God, is anyone listening? Right? If you are only measuring yourself on metrics, you are going to get so depressed. It's such a roller coaster of like, oh, today's great, tomorrow sucks, today's great, right? You can't be measuring yourself strictly on metrics. Here's the thing. I would say measure your success by, am I releasing content on a consistent basis on the schedule that I have committed to? Because remember, like we said in the beginning, it's a long game. It's a long game, and it's going to be up and down. The metrics are great. The numbers are great. Watch them, have your moment with them. But if you are only relying on the metrics, you're going to have many, many weeks, if not months, where you're like, our metrics are down. Nobody's listening. Who cares? Why am I doing this? It will demotivate you. I think what you have to remember is success, it's not linear. It's not linear, especially not in content. You know, like you said with your video, you released your video, it was out for months, and then the moment came that it was popular, and suddenly, boom, you're up to 20,000, from like 90 views to 20,000. Yep. That's exactly how content works. You don't know when you're going to win, but you have to be in the game long enough to put the odds in your favor. Yeah. So I would say, just be consistent. If you say you're going to release something every Wednesday, release something every Wednesday, come hell or high water, commit to 100 episodes of whatever it is, and give yourself enough time to see the benefits take place.
Yeah. Before I let you go, I have a question I always ask my guests at the end. And it boils down to one of the things that I really identified in my business development journey is having conversations and authentic conversations with people. And I find I get to learn a lot, just like us having this conversation today. So if you had an opportunity to have a conversation with someone, dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh boy. You know what? The older I get, I never got to meet my grandfather. And so the older that I get, the more I start to realize life. You know, I'm 36 at this point. I have, a kid of my own. And, I would love the opportunity as much as, because people ask me this question in business. And in business, it's a very different thing. But if I could just meet somebody and have that conversation, I would love to have had a chance to have met my grandfather. I think he was born in 1901. I think it would have been a hell of a story. Yeah.
Before my grandfather passed away, I sat down with him. He had made a visit. He lived in Toronto, and he made a visit here. And I sat down with him, and I just asked him about his life story, and the amount of things I learned about. He was born in 1914 or 15. Yeah. And so he went through the whole Japanese invasion in Hong Kong, and he was captured as a prisoner, and just the stories and the struggles and, the perseverance and resilience. There's so much to be learned. And you're right. There's always that business person we all want to talk to, right? But, some of the most fascinating stories are, right within our own realm, our own family. Yeah.
And I would say too, I've had a lot of interviews. I've interviewed some pretty incredible business owners and CEOs and founders. And let me tell you, some of the best interviews I ever had are not with the tippy top. Those people are so careful about what they'll talk about. Some of my favorite interviews I've had on the BDP are with people just like me and you, where it's like we have, a small or medium-sized business. We've been doing it, bootstrapped. Right?
Yes.
They tend to be the best stories, right? They tend to be the most authentic, fun stories, and really actually even get most of the time more views than some of the bigger guests. So I think it's really important to be authentic in every interaction and try not to be so protective, because it really does affects the shows. It affects the communication and conversations. But, going back, I also knew my grandfather on my mom's side, and he was born in 1911. Same thing. Went through training for World War II. Ended up staying home because his family had a huge farm. And so he got asked to stay home and farm. And I remember it bothered him till the end of days, but he died when I was, once again, too young to truly have that understanding. I think I was 15 or 16. So I wish, man, I wish that as an adult that I could have an adult conversation, I think, with my grandparents. I think it would have been a very interesting conversation to have. It's pretty cool that you got to have one.
Yeah. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for taking time to come on here. I could keep talking with you on multitude of topics, and I think we should schedule that in. Let's have you back on. I think we have great conversation today, so let's build up on that. But yeah, thank you for joining the podcast today.
Yeah, likewise, Chris. Thanks for having me.